Okay, this is an introduction to Broadcast Station, which is a add-on product for Unity Intercom. What Broadcast Station particularly does is it adds an 8-talent user interface. It's a very simplified interface to Unity Intercom, but it also provides the ability to do talkback buttons, local buttons, mute their own microphone. They're not sitting in front of a typical Unity workstation, but rather they're just actually sitting out there. It's a typical like a news broadcaster or a sports reporter or something like that. And they would be using the system. It's much simpler. It also does modify and adjust the broadcast path, particularly with a built-in gain sharing auto mixer that does allow it allows the broadcast station to adjust the individual volumes of the microphones so you don't get, for example, extra ambient noise when more mics are on and things like that. So it's a pretty neat addition to the whole product, and it integrates all of it together in one package. So you have full real-time IFB capability, talkback to a local or remote intercom, real-time in-ear talent-to-talent communications, and also it greatly simplifies the installation soundboard requirements so that they don't have to do all these exotic mix minuses that they used to have to do before. So anyway, this is we're going to start right into the Unity Broadcast Station software, and this assumes that you do have the Unity Broadcast Station hardware installed and configured in your system. There is a hardware installation guide for that explains that, and we will have some videos that kind of support that as well. But what you see here is the initial screen that will happen once you've installed your Broadcast Station software and licensed the product appropriately. When you first bring it up, the only thing it will do is accept a license code that will come from Unity Intercom, and you will install that. And then what you're seeing here is the actual first screen that shows up. There's several different, if you look at the top here, there's a toolbar along the top, and it's very simplified. You have a general interface or a general configuration page that does to configure some basic information about the product. And then for each of your talent, and there's up to 8 talent in a typical broadcast station. These are 8 microphones or 8 people that are on air or whatever you want to think of. They're all exactly identical, but there's individual 8 of them up there. And also there's a log table or log page back here, which does explain any kind of error messages or informational messages you may want to check periodically if things don't happen to be working right. The very first page, though, however, is the general page. And what you see here is a very simplified interface. There's some basic configuration options for where is the Unity Intercom server that we're communicating with. So we have either an IP address or a DNS name for that if you have one set up. Also, and I'm just going to go through the different regions, the little indication down here shows green, for example, if I have a successful connection to a Unity Intercom. Before I really set up anything else, I have to have a valid connection to a Unity Intercom server, and I have to, down here, pick my audio device that I'm using. I'll explain that in a minute. Some other general settings that we have, start automatically at login. All this really basically says is that if the system reboots or something happens like that and it automatically logs in, you want Unity Broadcast Station to start up on its own. This is almost an option you would always check on. It's just nice to have. The second option, kind of seldom used. It's a show and dock option. Really what you get to do with this is if you're a person who likes to tab through their different applications that are running on the desktop, you can check this on and it'll actually show up in the tab regions there. Typically it doesn't because Unity Broadcast Station runs up, the menu runs in the upper right system toolbar up there in the very upper right, and rather than a typical menu. And that's basically the initial explanation there. Down here, of course, the broadcast station hardware itself appears to the system as a audio device, and we will pick the particular audio device. Now, the common device today that is in the broadcast station, and again, this is for the configuration that we have today, it can change it at some point, is the Claret 8 Pre USB device here. And so we're going to select that. At this point, the Unity Broadcast Station is now communicating hardware-wise to and from that system. This audio buffer size mentioned here on the right is our communication path back to Unity Intercom server. And you notice if we hover over things that we get a nice little pop-up, kind of gives you a little more explanation about each one of these features. On a typical hardwired situation, whether it's in studio or even remote over the internet, but we still have a hardwired network connection going to the software, 60 milliseconds is a good number to use. You're not worried about real-time communication back and forth to the intercom, because we're talking about talk back and interrupt traffic. That's not really that critical. If you're going to be using this over a cellular or Wi-Fi connection, you'll probably want to bring this audio buffer up to about 140 milliseconds, and that's a typical Unity intercom configuration number. Just remember, for typical network, if you're hardwired, use 60, and if you're over Wi-Fi, use 140 milliseconds. Finally, at the very bottom here is the active user status. We have not currently configured any users, and we'll get back to how this looks once we've set them up. And we'll just kind of explain that a little bit further as we get going. Finally, what we're going to do, one last thing before we kind of move on, is I have a server, and this is on my internal network. I'm going to set up my Unity server, and this is my own IP address. I happen to have a Unity intercom server running on a machine that's at that address. And when I tab beyond that, immediately my server connection status goes green. And what that says is it did an initial connection, got the user configured information from the intercom server, and now we're ready to set up the rest of the application here. Okay, continuing on with the Unity Broadcast Station software setup, we've gone through, we've configured our Unity server, and we see the connection status is in fact green. We know that things are working now, and we've selected an audio device, which in the current version of the Broadcast Station hardware is the Focusrite Claret 8 pre-USB. This could change in future versions of the Broadcast Station hardware, or different flavors of it may use different devices. But in what we're doing right here, we're talking to the Claret 8 pre. Going on beyond this, this is basically the initial setup that we have on the initial screen. So what we have to do at this point is we have to set up each one of our actual talent users. This would be your newscasters, your sports lead guy, or the backup people. Typically, for example, in a news station broadcast, you have a main anchor, a backup anchor, a weather guy, and a sports guy. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through a typical configuration for setting up those 4 people. So what I'm going to do is at the very top here, you can see my users 1 through user 8. We're going to go user 1. We have not, in fact, defined this. So this brings up the user configuration page. This is broken down into several different areas. At the top, we have the Unity intercom login information. That consists of a login name and a password, and whether or not we want to automatically log this person in when Broadcast Station comes up. Typically, you would do that. We may have users that are, for example, guests of the show, and they're not going to be in an IFB path. They're not going to be doing any kind of in-ear monitoring of any kind whatsoever. You're just going to hand them a microphone, and they're going to be on. So we would set them up, for example, as our 5th user. They wouldn't even have a intercom login or password, but all of the microphones are active at all times for everybody. Just basically they're available. We can adjust their levels, and so we could bring in extra sort of side microphones for whatever type of application we happen to need. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to select a user to log in as for my user 1, and these come from the Unity Intercom server configured remotely, and that's another configuration altogether. Typically you have this already. So I'm going to pick up a login name. This shows the available login names that we have. We happen to have set up a Talent 1 through Talent 4 username. So I'm going to pick Talent 1, and in my case here, my password is 1234, and I'm going to log this person in automatically. Now, this actually already did the login itself. You notice in the middle section for channel selection, it filled in some information of what's available. If your Unity Intercom server has multiple channel groups, it shows what ones are available here. We only have the studio group right here. A quick check going back to the main screen, we can see that I now have a configured Talent 1 user, and they are in fact logged in. You can see that's green. They can be heard by everybody else locally, and we are currently broadcasting to the soundboard or remotely to a Unity Intercom server or both. This is just a quick screener to see if anybody's logged in and whether or not they're currently on air or not on air. So again, back to the Talent 1 configuration. We can see that their name in the top has changed to Talent 1. Go back in here, and so what we end up in the middle configuration, we have channel selection here. Now these are Unity Intercom configuration options, as well as a few local things that Broadcast Station itself does uniquely. The first thing is the channel group that I mentioned, and we have our talent set up in what we call our studio group on the Unity Intercom. That's just where all our studio talent is. One group. It makes it simple. That's all that. So what they do is they have the availability to talk back on channels that are only available to that group. Moving on a little bit here, and this will be kind of more explanatory as we get there. The broadcast output channel. This is a Unity Intercom PL channel that will take my broadcast output. Typically in a in-studio version of Broadcast Station, where a newsroom or something like that, you're not going to even enable this because you're not going to want to be continually broadcasting to the intercom. If you were doing a remote broadcast, so for example, back in studio, 100 miles away is a Unity Intercom server that's tied to the soundboard there, and we take this out on site to like a car dealership and we're doing a sports radio show, we would turn on a broadcast channel and we could pick any one of these. And these are party line channels that are defined in the Unity Intercom system previously. I can select which one of those to use. And once we select that, we are going to be broadcasting by default immediately on those channels. And that audio can be picked up remotely and played out of there to a local soundboard that might be attached. In this particular configuration, we're going to pretend we're a newsroom, and we're not going to broadcast on an output channel. Associated with this underneath is a actual audio output from the broadcast station hardware itself. And this is where the analog broadcast audio, typically going to the station's broadcast soundboard for this user, is going to go. In a typical configuration with the Clarity 8 Pre, these are the available outputs, and by default, Talent 1 through Talent 8 are assigned outputs 13 through 20. And that way, each of the individual users has separate outputs, and they can go to the soundboard as separate people, and they can mix any way they want to or whatever they need to. You could actually configure all of your users to use the same output, and Broadcast Station itself will mix all that audio together and send it out over one stream to the soundboard, greatly simplifying any of the in-studio mixing. The A1 operator there has a lot less to do in that case, and it just makes it a whole lot easier. In a remote application, for example, with let's say a live view camera where you have one feed going to the camera, we might also combine those together and just do one feed there. So I have 4 people talking, we're all out, we're mixed together in the same output. I'm going to leave this alone and leave it out on local output 13, which is just the typical broadcast output for the first talent in Broadcast Station. The next upper right one here is the talkback channel or user. This is a Unity Intercom PL channel or individual Unity Intercom user. In the Broadcast Station hardware, each of the talent operators have a talkback local mute button, and it's generally a big metal button. There is a wireless button option, and there's 2 buttons on there. They can actually press the local, press talkback, or hold them both together to mute the actual conversation itself. So what this is configuring here is, if I press my talkback button, Broadcast Station is going to take that audio off air, and we're going to now be communicating to the Unity Intercom system on whatever I select here. So what we're going to set up here, for example, is I want to talk to the director, and that's a Unity Intercom PL channel that we've defined. So when I press my talkback button, I go off air, and I'm talking to the director on Unity Intercom. In addition to that, it's paired right underneath it. I can also, when pressing the talkback button, also communicate audio right out a analog output. That analog output it comes straight from Broadcast Station. It can be used locally if you want your soundboard guy to be able to hear something through his headphones that he happens to have on all the time. In most situations, this isn't really configured. Okay, moving on, the incoming interrupt channel. Now this is once again another Unity Intercom channel, and what this means is that we're going along great. We're doing our broadcast, we hear ourselves, we hear program feeds, all that kind of thing. But when the director or anybody else wants to actually interrupt us, what comes in and actually interrupts our audio. So if they come in and someone on Unity Intercom talks, in this case on the Studio Talent channel, all of my broadcasting audio or everything I hear in my ears can optionally duck out, and I will hear that particular intercom person talking to me. So this just basically says if there's intercom traffic on that channel, it will maybe alter my earpieces, again, according to some configuration that we have here in a minute. And this is basically what we're listening for to stop us. The last configuration in this channel selection page is the audio feed mix minus source. So if we drop this down, what we do is we have optionally, we have local inputs 1 through 8, and these are physical analog inputs on the broadcast station hardware itself. These feeds are real time. So if we are in a news studio, we run a sort of a mix minus back to our broadcast station from the soundboard. We're going to hear this stuff real time. There's no delay, and it's actually and that's one of the main reasons that broadcast station exists, is so that IFB can be in fact real time. We also have any program feeds available from Unity Intercom can be used as a program feed source as well. So you see at the bottom, we have a streaming music option here, which we could select. And that would be if we were in a remote application for radio broadcast or something, and I'm getting the program feeds from the studio, which again might be 50 miles away, but I want to hear those in my ear as well. Even though my local traffic with everybody is going to be real time, that's going to be about on a 1/10 of a second delay, but nobody will know because, let's face it, they're 50 miles away, and that just doesn't mean that much. For this particular configuration, I do happen to have a program feed on my local input 1, and I'm just going to select that for now. Okay, moving on with the Unity Broadcast Station software configuration. We've already gone through the actual intercom user name, password, enable for login, and configuring the broadcast, talkback, and interrupt channels that Unity Intercom uses, as well as the optional physical analog outputs and inputs that are being used on the broadcast station itself. So now we move into the middle section of this particular page here. And what we have is we have a couple different areas here. Audio ducking levels, and what this is referencing is each one of these individual items, be it the program feed, or if a person does a private talk from Unity Intercom, they can actually direct talk talent individually in it, in addition to talking to the entire group of talent at one time. They can talk to you on a one-on-one basis. As well as if an IFB happens to happen, how much do we bring down the audio levels of what you're hearing in your ear at the time? Typical operation would be to mute completely. So what we would do is we would say, all right, so the program feed, we want to duck to -infinity dB, and that means off. If something occurs that interrupts anything, we're going to take that program feed all the way to 0. In addition to that, if somebody private talks us, we're going to take any of our local audio traffic all the way off. Or if somebody sends some interrupt on the interrupt channel itself, we are going to take the local audio that's going on in our ears from each of the other talent. Again, we're going to duck them completely out. This is a typical configuration to -infinity on everybody. If you have people that don't want to necessarily lose all the audio, you could set this, and a good number is about -24 dB. What you'll see is when somebody interrupts you is that what's going on in the studio drops off significantly, but not completely gone. So you can still kind of follow what's going on, even though you're being interrupted. And that's just the way we set it. But most people tend to like it to be complete infinity. In the middle of the screen here, we have audio ducking options. It's just one little option in here. So if the user themselves presses their talkback button, do you want them to suddenly not hear everybody else in studio that happens to be on air or involved in their local mixing into their ear? So if we want to shut them out, so I'm only talking to the director and the director is only talking to me and we don't hear anything else, you can turn this on. Typically, that's kind of an option that people like to have, so that once we go talkback mode, we're in our own little world and we're not being interrupted by anything else. Down below this, we have on-air routing and Automix. let's first explain on-air audio routing. The broadcast station itself has well, it's not optional, standard relay inputs that can be attached to a remote broadcast soundboard, and this will gate on and off the talent microphones depending on whether or not that person is on air. There are three things that can be done with the operator audio or with the talent audio when they go on air or when they go off air. And the first three options in this little window right here explain that. The first option is whether or not other users can hear this microphone only when we're on air. And that means everybody else in the studio can hear me if that relay is closed. If I leave this off, they can hear me all the time, no matter what. And that's typically the way we've got it set up right here. We're all talking. This is just, we got all the live mics and everybody hears everybody and nothing fancy is going on. But if you want them to be able to gate in and out from the local operators that happen to be the other talent people, whether the main news talent, the backup guy, the weather guy, the sports guy, only when he's particularly on air, then you can turn that option on. Second option here is to broadcast this user microphone. And again, what we mentioned for the broadcast path to Unity Intercom or the analog output, we can gate that audio on and off whether or not the on-air relay for this user is closed. If we turn this option off, we are broadcasting continuously all the time, no matter what. So it's commonly in a newsroom environment, we would leave this off and we would typically turn on that first option where they only hear themselves. So other people can hear them when they're on air. And let me mention the third option, that they can actually hear themselves only when they're on air. Commonly, newsrooms will have this type of a configuration. And what you see, for example, here is I am broadcasting continually to the soundboard because the guy at the soundboard's he's taking me, he's muting, he's unmuting based on whether I should or shouldn't be on air. But he always wants to be getting my audio no matter what. That way he can do queuing and hear my audio levels and do all those kinds of checks that he needs to do. And broadcast station will always continually just pass out that audio. However, the talent themselves can tell by the presence of whether or not their microphone's on, whether or not they're on air. It's a nice little feedback for them, so they know when they're kind of silent in their own headset that they're not on air and they can do whatever. So it's a good confirmation of when they've been switched on and switched off. As well, a lot of times you don't want to hear the other people in the room when they're not on air. You're only wanting to hear things associated with the broadcast. So that's why these two relay options are going on there. All right, moving on with the configuration of the middle portion of the individual user configuration screens or the individual talent. We have our last option in the on-air audio routing and Automix option, which says bypass the broadcast automixer. One of the really cool features of Broadcast Station is that it contains a 9-bus gain-sharing automixer. You can think of it as a Dan Dugan-style automixer, but we don't license the technology from him, so we don't give it the trademark name of Dan Dugan on it. But it is a gain-sharing automixer, and it works exactly the same way. By default, all of the 8 talent operators are involved in an Automix. And again, you should read up on Automix to learn what that does for you. But typically what ends up happening is when you actually have more than one microphone on, it distributes the overall gain of the system among the microphones. So you don't have, for example, you may be familiar with a situation where you turn on one microphone and it's great, but if I turn on 8 microphones, the background noise is just overbearing. We can hear a hiss or whatever. And again, it multiplies 8 times. So what typically by default, all of the output microphones, all 8 of them are actually in the Automix itself. And they're all involved and active in this. If we want anybody to not necessarily have their microphone be adjusted based on the status of whether other mics are open or closed, we can take, for example, in this user, we can bypass the Automixer if I turn this on, and the output volume for that operator will never be modified by the presence of any other microphones. We go back to the way standard soundboards work, and so nothing's actually happening here. We're not gaining the effects of what Broadcast Station can do for us. This would almost never be turned on, but it again is an option if you needed somebody to just, I don't want their volumes ever messed with, period. We can bypass the Automixer for it. Normally, everybody's completely off here. The last section over here on the right is the Unity Intercom audio section, and this is basically there's a couple other things. The confidence tone doesn't really necessarily apply to that, but it does. We just put it in this area just to kind of group them together. The main volume level you see here is what is the volume level when somebody from Unity Intercom interrupts us. They decide to talk to us individually or press their party line channel to talk to all the talent. What's that volume come in at? So if it's coming in way too hot, we can actually back it off with this slider level. By default, this is 0 dB, which is pretty darn loud, frankly. And so you can just play with that. Have your director key up the party line channel to talk to override everything, and then adjust this volume here. Our program feed, which we currently have hooked into our input 1, as we picked up here earlier, we can adjust the actual level of that. And this is what this particular talent user is hearing in their ear. And this is in their in-ear monitor, or if they have a broadcast headset, whatever's going on there. This is the level of the program feed. Now, this is not, the program feeds in Broadcast Station are what we call mix minus everybody. So this is the intro, outro type audio. It is pre-recorded segments, but it doesn't contain any audio from any other talent in studio, because Broadcast Station itself does all that, and it does it all real time. So what we're getting here, it's a much simpler feed from a soundboard. It's just all the other stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the guys talking in studio. So we just set this to a nice comfortable level, and we have nice little bouncing meters here indicating what's going on. The last little setup here is the confidence tone. And what this is when each of the operators, again, have a local talkback mute button. And when they press those buttons, if we set this to a certain level, they get a little confidence in their ear that they, in fact, are in talkback or in local or in mute. So if we press the talkback button, we get a little high-pitched double beep in the ear, and it just tells us that, hey, my button's working. I know when I press this that I'm not on air anymore. Or if I press both buttons together and I mute, it gives a low-level solid tone, and I know I'm off air. Just a little confidence that that's actually going on. Okay, the final bottom section of the user configuration page. And again, keep in mind that this is all for our first talent user at this point. We are configuring the options just for that person. The other 7 talent operators are configured in exactly the same fashion. In fact, the screens are identical. There's some guides at the bottom to show, for example, which tab at the top here we happen to be on. So the bottom is referencing what's going on in the talent's ear and what's going on with that talent's broadcast levels. And so what you see here is you see individual faders and VU meters for each one of the talents, not only ourselves, but the other 7 people that happen to be on the show or on the show set with us. And so we might, for example, configure that, we want to configure our own audio level. And what you will see here is you will always see an audio level, whether or not we can hear ourselves, whether or not we're broadcasting or anything like that. And we would just set our mix for our ear here. A couple things to note about each one of these little groups here. There's a green indicator here. What this says is, am I currently, if I have the Talent 1 in-ear monitor in or the Talent 1 headset on, do I hear whoever this is? And this is myself. I see that I do not, and I do not right now because I've checked these options to say they can only hear themselves when they're on air. Down here in this option right here, for example. So if I check that button, it immediately goes green. I can hear myself in that headset. So it's a great way to set levels. In our configuration here, we're talking about our first 4 talent people is our main anchor, our backup anchor, our weather guy, and our sports guy. And that's talent 1 through talent 4. I have not configured the other 3 talent people yet, but we'll do that shortly here. So again, what we would set up here is individually a great way to start this all off is to set the individual talent people that I want to hear at 0 dB, and that means basically no gain, there's no actually, again, we're not bringing it down, we're not bringing the levels up. This is just a nice flat response that we can set up, and then we can play with it later on. So what we see in this configuration, we're seeing BU activities, and the reason for this right now is we have people on those microphones that are talking, and we can see their levels actually coming in. And again, these do repeat for each of the 8 users. The green indicators, again, indicate whether or not I can actually hear them at this point. And in addition to this, here in the upper right, it's not very well labeled, but there's a little checkbox that can remove those users from my own Automix. So we mentioned earlier the broadcast station has a 9-bus gain sharing Automixer. And what that is there's a broadcast Automixer, and each one of the individual users themselves has their own Automix bus for what's going on in their ear. And that just basically is the combination of the other microphones that are involved. We can Automix into their ears. By default, the Automixer is on and it's working all the time. The Automixer is post fader for whatever you set here. So for example, if I want the sports guy down over here to be a little quieter than everybody else, then he will Automix in always a little bit quieter than everybody. And that's what his gain will be. But again, generally best in most broadcast environments to actually set them all equal, about a 0 dB. If somebody's particularly loud, that's generally corrected at the broadcast station hardware itself. There's some gain control knobs. That's where you initially level everybody out and get all that configured. For now, we're going to leave the other 4 operators, or the other 4 users off. Even though the green indicator indicates that we are hearing them right now, the slider's all the way down, so we actually don't have any contribution from their microphones whatsoever. On the right side here, we have an output level section, and what this is it indicates what am I hearing in my ear right now, and I am in fact hearing a combination of the first 4 people. We don't currently have this microphone for talent 1 is not in there actually, they're not talking, but they're listening to the other 3 people. The combined level of that is what's showing up here in the output level. And again, this is the output of the Automixer, so you can actually see that it's, even though they're all talking pretty actively going on here, we're not going to clip anything because the gain has been distributed over these 4 microphones. The last 2 sections over here have to do with the broadcast path. The middle section here is what is the contribution to the broadcast path of myself. And if I'm talking into this, we can see, first of all, in the green light will indicate, am I broadcasting now? And if I am, not only what am I broadcasting myself, but the total would be, for example, if I combine broadcast audio outputs, let's say all 8 people are going to broadcast on one analog output, it's being mixed together, the total of that broadcast would be showing up on the right side here. If you have individual outputs, then the total will always pretty much reflect what's going on individually. And again, this green indicator will indicate what's going on. So that pretty much wraps this all up. We can go through and pick the same type of thing for the other 3 users that we happen to have, and we're going to set them up exactly the same as this. We're going to actually configure the broadcast audio outputs to be on different analog outputs so that they can be mixed separately at a broadcast soundboard. And we'll just real quickly go through that. So for my user 2, I've switched that. You can see that at the top of the screen, we're user 2. This has not been configured at all. And they have no mixed values or anything like this. So what we're going to do, again, we're going to select them to be the Talent 2 user, which again is my same password that I have here. And we can enable that for login. This is by default, pick the next audio output, which is output 14 of the broadcast station. My talkback is going to be to the director as well. We're not going to do any analog talkbacks in addition to the Unity Intercom stuff. If anybody talks in the studio talent channel, it's going to interrupt this user as well. And they want to use the same program feed as the other person. Once again, we're going to take them up to say minus 21 dB. Give them a little bit of confidence tone. We're going to full ducking when anybody interrupts us. And by default, once again, I'm going to set all these guys to be at 0 dB so that we're all hearing everybody together. We're going to set all 4 up the same way. 3, once again, we're doing the same thing. This will be talent 3. 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and we're going to enable that. By default again, 15, we're going to talk back to the director. We're going to be interrupted on the studio talent channel. They're using local input 1. And again, these are all typically set up one time. Everybody's just going to pretty much broadcast all the time right here. Pretty much minus 24 is what we're doing here. Just some level of confidence. Slide these up to, again, for the 4 people, 0. Oops. Good. Bring that right back down. Went a little hot. Again, typically we're going to leave everybody in the broadcast Automix. It just works better that way, and that's kind of the way that everybody should be operating. Finally, our last. This is our sports guy. We called him Talent 4, but someone may have set him up in the intercom server as sports or whoever. Default to the right thing again. Once we're going to talk back to the director. Interrupt from the studio talent. Pick the local input 1 here. Again, full ducking when they interrupt us. We do want to duck local mix during talkback, which I forgot to do on the other ones. And again, we're going to go to about a minus 24 on this level. A good starting point. Some levels there, and we're going to go ahead and flatten all these out. Okay. Since I forgot to duck local mix during all the talkbacks, I'm going to go back here and turn these on for my other talent as well. Come back to talent 1. I'm going to let everybody hear everybody all the time right now anyway. Okay, so what we've done is we've set up 4 talent users. They're our main newscaster, backup newscaster, weather guy, and sports guy. They are our talent 1 through 4, and we can see them reflected. I'm actually currently looking at the talent 1 screen. We can see their mix down here, and the talent 1 user is currently hearing the aggregate of the 2, 3, and 4 users, and talent 1 is not currently talking right now. Talent 1 microphone is live. It happens to be in the same room with us, which is why we're getting a little bit of an indicator on this here. And you can see they're broadcasting. And I can actually demonstrate if I pick up their headset and start putting it in my microphone right here, we can actually be transmitting for talent 1. And you can see, for example, the individual output meter and the total is in fact going up as we go here. Set that back down here. You can see that kind of goes away. Now we're going to go back to the main screen, and we get a little more useful information of the 4 talent people that we've set up and what they are currently doing. We can see that they are, in fact, logged into the Unity Intercom server. This is whether or not they have pressed their talkback button, whether or not they are in the local mix, which means the other talent can hear each other. So in this case, the talent 1 through 4 users can all hear each other because they're all indicated in green. And whether or not they're being broadcast. So not only are they being broadcast to the soundboard, they're also being broadcast to each other real time. An example here, if we press our talkback button, and we're talking about talent 1, what you'll see when we press the talkback button is that the talkback light goes green. The local and broadcast lights go off because they are no longer talking to the other people in studio, and they're no longer broadcasting to the soundboard. And as long as they hold their talkback button down, that's what happens. They have a local button as well. And what that does is it allows you to talk to the other talent in studio, but it takes you out of the broadcast. So I can say something really rude about somebody if I want to, or something similar to that type of a situation. So we press the local button. What you can see is the broadcast light went to a gray, so it says we are still in everybody else's ears, but we are no longer broadcasting. The final option, if they take both buttons and press them together, it's a mute. And you can see that they've gone off of local, off of broadcast. They don't even hear themselves. Their microphone is shut off. They can cough, scream, whatever they want to do. And as long as they're holding the 2 buttons down, they're just not in the mix any longer. So this is, again, it's a nice overall status of what's just going on. Are the people in? Are they talking? Are they on, off air? It doesn't show signal levels, but it's a quick and dirty. Just are things kind of operating okay from this screen? Finally, the last page we have here is our log screen, and this is just simply informational text output from the broadcast station. Things that are working and are not working. You should normally see things that the switch interface, and these are relay connections and the talk things. Those should connect up. The Claridate Pre, which is, again, is the core element of our broadcast station. It's open and running successfully. We successfully contacted the intercom server, so we know that communications path, and each one of our talent 1 through 4 logged in properly. If you ever have difficulties, and for example, let's go back to our talent 4, and I'm going to just change their password to something that's completely invalid. I've changed them to, it's wrong. So what we actually see going on here, their audio is still being mixed in everybody's ears because, again, broadcast station is sort of standalone in mixing local audio and broadcast path audio. But at the main screen, we can see, for example, this Talent 4 user is not logged into the system. I don't know why. So what we do is we go to the login screen, and we can see repeatedly broadcast station is trying to log in over and over, and it says Talent 4 could not log in, check the username or password. So one of these two options is in fact wrong. I did change the Talent 4 user, and I gave them one extra character in their password. We've just changed that back. Now we go back and we're in fact logged in. You will see other things. For example, if the address of your intercom server is wrong, you'll see some log messages saying, hey, we can't contact that guy. If instead of an IP address, you use a DNS name and you typed it wrong, it might show that it can't resolve the DNS name. Just make sure you've corrected the spelling. In addition, if you don't have an audio device working properly, it can throw some errors out there as well and show you that. Okay, also mentioning one final thing. We mentioned previously earlier on in the video series that you could, for example, have guest users that are in studio. This might be the guy that comes in every Friday and does a special segment on something, but we're never going to give him an in-ear monitor. We don't care about him talking back to producers or directors. He's just going to get a microphone clipped on him and he's going to take off and go. But he needs to be in the broadcast. He needs to be working. But he's just not going to talk to the intercom at all. So we're going to set him up as user 5. And normally, if we would set this up, we would pick a login name from Unity Intercom. But in addition to the standard login names that we have here, and they're just used for reference so that we make sure we use something that's valid, I can also just type something in here. So I'm going to call this the extra guy. He doesn't have a password, and he's not logged into Unity. We're never going to enable him. But he just becomes extra guy. We can see him highlight down here in the bottom, and he's just the other dude in this whole thing. He's broadcasting on local output 17 in our case here. He doesn't have a program feed form or anything. There's no ducking. We don't have to really set up anything for him. He's just going to be in the overall mix. And in fact, we don't even need to adjust his own levels at all because he doesn't have an in-ear monitor. He doesn't have a headset. But the other talent need to also hear audio from the extra guy. So we're going to go once again back through the other 4 talent operators we set up. We're going to enable them to hear the 5th microphone. All right. So again, everybody can hear him. We may, for the extra guy, want to gate his audio from the broadcast only when his relay is closed from the broadcast soundboard. So we can say broadcast only when on air. We might want to say that other people can only hear him when he's on air as well. So we notice right now, if I go back to Talent 1, the Talent 1 user can hear all the 4 talent in studio, but the extra guy, he's not really included. He's talking right now, but I can't hear him because his light isn't green, and that's because his on-air broadcast relay is not closed at this point. The soundboard guy hasn't enabled him, and he's not talking. But in this fashion, you can actually you can have extra mics all the way up to all 8 users that you have that aren't necessarily tied to your intercom server, but they are involved in the broadcast themselves. And and you can just drop them in and out. And usually most stations have one or two of these at most. And they just enable them from the soundboard, or we can actually leave those mics live. The nice thing about the gain sharing auto mixer is I'm not going to hear the extra noise from that mic, even if it is live. So that kind of makes it a whole lot nicer in the broadcast station world.